Hey nerds, Farber Jesse here. Got a very cool treat for you today. In this video, my partner at No-Till Growers and the host of the collaborative farming podcast, Jackson Roulette, notably a longtime Paperpot skeptic, gives the Paperpot transplanter from Nitten an honest look. What I love about this review is that Jackson is just completely frank about his prior thoughts on this system, how it breaks down financially for him, and then adds a lot of perspective to what this tool can, but also perhaps can't do for a farm and for his own farm. Anyway, I don't think you need a long rambling intro from me. I talk all day, every day. So let's leave this one to Jackson. But in the name of full disclosure, Nitten is a No-Till Growers sponsor. Otherwise, here is Jackson Roulette on the Nitten Paperpot transplanter system.
All right. Yeah, no, I don't think I've talked more trash about something I know so little about. I bet they're going to love it when I open the video that way. Now, to be fair, I've never used the system myself, so when I got the opportunity to try it out, let's just say that I thought I would be a pretty impartial and slightly skeptical grower to do so. So I guess the big question is, did it win me over? Now, before we get to that question, I do want to start out walking everyone through the initial setup. So we received our Paperpot system through Nitten. I believe we got ours through Small Farm Works in the States. They've got plenty of distributors in the US, link down here. Super easy to put together. I love the IKEA-like instructions, although I cannot read Japanese. Everything feels super durable. No cheap plastic parts, probably going to last almost as long as my broad fork. So I love that. Let's start out with seeding trays. Shout out to Till Soil for the seed starting mix. We use Sprout for these trays. You can check out the link down there too. After destroying a few chains trying to figure it out without reading the instructions, because farmers, I was able to create trays for seeding in less time than using our traditional soil block method. When we measured how much soil we used per tray, it was slightly less with the paper chains. Obviously the cell size matters here. It's much smaller with the chains, but there are more of them. So there are 264 in a tray. Now, obviously the point against it here is that the chains are single use and cost around $4 a piece, depending on how many you buy. And that's not including the cost of the soil and the initial investment of the system itself. Just to put that into context, for the 4-inch chains that we used for beets, it took 2 trays to plant 4 48-inch rows in our tunnels. That's on one bed. Now, it also took a little under 1.5 chains with the 6-inch spacing for lettuce and spinach. So we're looking at about $5 to $8 in additional material to plant a bed than you normally would, but you'll see why that cost may be worth it later. Now, on top of that, with the soil to plant ratio that you're saving, it just means that you can avoid a better potting mix, right? Like this. Now, I can't stress enough the amount of space that this saves. Not only are we always looking to be more efficient with bench space in the greenhouse, especially in the spring, when some of us are also using heat, and we have 2 seasons worth of plants in there at a time, but my greenhouse space isn't even my greenhouse space. We work with our friends Max and Davita at Majestic Green. Shout out to them. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we share their greenhouse space. So greenhouses can be very expensive and are often wildly underutilized, hence the sharing, right? So being able to fit more plants into a smaller space can shrink your footprint, shrink your investment, increase the cycle time for trays, good all around. Using the system itself is super gratifying, though you don't get that really good satisfying thunk of the blocker. It is like mixing seeding with origami, although my best origami is a paper airplane. There are more moving pieces than with blocking, and certainly than with normal cell trays, but I think it's easier to actually get more consistent results if you're having someone else seed trays for you. Plus, you can bottom water more effectively. You don't got to worry about the blocks falling apart until the roots are established, and it just seems to be more user-friendly in the long run. The setup of the transplanter itself, super straightforward, no moving parts, easy to adjust, built to last. Also looks like a race car, which is cool and fitting. The first run, though, was my only run. Now, I've only had time to run one planting through this system, so my field experience is a bit limited. I mean, it's December. Things outside look like this. To prep the beds, we cleared out any debris. In this case, I added a typical amendment regiment, which you can find here, and incorporated that with the tilter. Now, to get off on a tangent, if I could just talk about scissor doors for a minute, I love them. I did 4 sets of end walls for the standard 14-foot Farmer's Friend Pro tunnels using leftover plastic, A little bit of extra fence rail, brace bands, wiggle wire, and these little white plastic clips from Johnny's, all for about $400. That's total, not per tunnel. And in the summer, on a warm winter day, whenever I need to, the tunnel can be fully vented without having to mess with the sidewalls. Now, none of this is my idea. I got it from a guide published by Johnny's. Hopefully, we can link those in the show notes as well. Anyway, first pass was awful. There's a bit of a learning curve to this, and if you're thinking about getting a Paperpot, be ready to sacrifice a few beds, even a few more trays. However, after I ruined the second chain, I got the depth adjustment dialed in, remembered to turn the camera back on, and the last bed of beets and lettuce went very smoothly. Now, here is one full chain, 264 cells with a 4-inch spacing of beets that I was able to plant, and this is real time. It just took me a few minutes longer than it would take me to seed it with the Jang. Far less time to transplant it. So in all, in this bed, I've got about 5 minutes. There's where I see the cost of the chains being way more than justified. These were planted on December 11th. Most of our outdoor crops, except for spinach, kale, carrots, are rotting away in the field after our first hard freeze. On the same day, 3 weeks ago, that these trays were seeded in the greenhouse, I direct seeded beets in another caterpillar tunnel, and they barely completed germinating. I can already see I've got some cultivation to do in those beds. I've got some bare spots. Whereas with the Paperpot, I'm ahead of the weeds by 2 weeks, and I'm going to have a better stand because I have more control over the germination considering the circumstances. So the pros, the system is just more efficient at every level of analysis. The space, the time, the labor, we'll get to that last one in a second. If you factor in factors, which is what you do with those, like saving on high-cost bench space, decreasing your plant cycle time, planting beds in 5 minutes instead of 45, the cost of the Paperpot more than pays for itself if you're using it well. On just this run alone, given the cost of the chains against the labor that I saved, if my goal is $20 an hour, it'd take me about $60 to plant this out by hand. Whereas with the time and the cost of the chains, the added cost of the chains, it cost me about $30. Not including the savings in the greenhouse, fewer trips to the field, all of that. Is it going to reduce your planting cost to near zero? Not hardly, but we plant about 50 to 60 beds in Paperpot eligible crops a year. And to be honest, that doesn't sound like a lot of savings quite yet, but again, we're going to get to that. With the cycle time, the amount of time that your trays are sitting in the greenhouse before they go out to the field. I'm not just thinking about from cash crop to cash crop, but creating more and longer windows between cash crops for cover cropping. However, to do that, you are going to have to follow cover crops with either non-Paperpot transplanting, or you could prepare the beds as you would following cover crops for direct seeding. What we often do is rake the previous cover crop into the aisles after we've terminated it with a tarp and prepare the beds as we would for seeding. It's doable, would be a bit more of a complex dance for sure. It's also worth considering. Also, what's your back worth? Now, I've been operating with a very slight but persistent back injury thanks to a trampoline for the past few weeks, and being able to plant beds like this upright was really nice for a change. Now, we're not getting any younger, at least the last time that I checked, and farming at this scale is already a very active vocation to say the least, even at 1 to 2 days a week. Maybe thinking about keeping us active for the long haul isn't really a bad investment. Now, I've been doing this for nearly 13 years, and I ain't 25 no more. I want to be in this good a working order so that I can wrestle my grandkids like I'm wrestling my kids now. Kind of like rethinking about how I wish I'd had a small tractor even for just human scale market gardening on less than an acre for all these years. The cons. Now, this is certainly going to take a season to learn. This is something I wouldn't entrust to anyone else on my farm until I really have it dialed in and the bed prep associated with it as well. It does require the right system. You might have to tweak yours. My operation happens to have a very favorable system already in place for the transplanter. I can see where you would have complications if you are using a heavier mulch system. We only use a couple of inches of leaf mulch at a time, or systems that require a lot of planting into residue very often. It's also not a simplifying force on the farm either. It is another piece of equipment to have to manage, one that doesn't have the flexibility of planting all your crops out in 72 cell soil blocks. And there are leftovers, which on farms that I see relying heavily on the Paperpot system, it's another task to make sure to clean up the remnants of the strips when you're out in the field so it doesn't look trashy. It's just a reality. And the system is just not cheap. We would need to use this tool for about 5 or more years for the savings to pay off on our small farm But that's just looking at it from a strict dollar value perspective. There are also grants out there like the KSU Small Farm Grant here in Kentucky that'll pay for the cost of investing in tools and systems to make farms more efficient or profitable. So there may be creative ways to go about covering the cost of this. The planter itself, which is the most expensive part, may also be a good tool to begin sharing with other farms in your area. It would be a great tool share opportunity. Could easily float between 2, maybe even 3 farms, although more than that, I can see where that would get tricky. Now, the big question for me is it a resilient tool? And on the surface, it looks like the answer is no, because you're dependent upon single-use supply chains. But in reality, I may have changed my mind on that. I've been thinking a lot about part-time farming lately, especially since I went from full-time to part-time. I actually enjoy farming more and my life more than I ever did doing it full-time. Just like we think about having a diversity of species on our farm for resiliency's sake and a diversity of market outlets for our economic resiliency, maybe having a diversity of incomes for our lives is another layer of resiliency that we can cultivate, at least until we get the whole parity of income for farmers and equitable land access figured out, which is going to be soon, right? There are many areas of our lives, even in farming, where we compromise or make trade-offs, right? I'm not crazy about the limited lifespan of the plastic on my tunnels, but sure enough, I'll replace them when it comes time, because for the time being, the cost of year-round production and food availability is worth it to me. It's not ideal. Ditto on the silage tarps. Using any fuel on the farm in the BCS is not perfect to me, but it has unlocked many soil health practices that otherwise wouldn't be available. This tool may open up opportunities on my farm, in my life, especially when it comes to wrapping up on time. Even more so if you're growing more crops that are eligible for the system, because we only grow so much in the way of lettuce, spinach, beets, green onions. It's not to say you can't grow more. They have 12-inch chains, and they also have methods for skip seeding cells to get to greater spacing, which we're going to play with next year. Anyway, backing up, part-time is not a bad word in farming to me anymore. There are many folks like me who love all of their vocations, plural, like working with other farmers, being involved with their churches, coaching soccer. And it doesn't have to be an all-or-nothing thing. Farming does not have to consume your life. It can just be a part of it. And that's okay too, you know, and this is one of those tools that are going to reinforce that. So am I sold on it? I absolutely am. I've officially changed my mind enough to see that it could very well have a place on our farm, especially for the time being when my time is my most limited resource. And it's getting worse with every passing year, especially as my kids grow. Now, I'm definitely going to be using this come the spring with beds that we prep over the winter and tarp to maintain their state. I'm going to see if any other growers in the area are thinking about this system and want to trial the planter before they either invest in it or we work out a cooperative agreement to share it. So that everybody's only out the cost of the trays and the chains. Maybe in the springtime I'll check back in with Farmer Jesse on Growers Daily for the results and, you know, if my feelings have changed, you know, as we've implemented the system moving forward.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that review. Shout out to Jackson for taking that tool for a test drive and for Nitten for providing it. I will put some links for Nitten in the show notes. If you enjoy these sorts of reviews and or Growers Daily or anything we do, pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or other merch at no-tillgrowers.com. That helps to support our work and makes everything we do possible. Or if you just like to support our work in general, you can do so at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers. Otherwise, thanks for watching. We'll see you back here soon for Growers Daily. Yeah, bye.
Planting a bed in 5 minutes instead of 45. The cost of the Paperpot, all of those things as well. Now, if my goal